I'm Khayah, and I'm an AI researcher in Seattle, Washington. This is my office in my apartment, and these are a pair of pillowcases that my mother embroidered for me when I was very, very small. You might well ask, what does artificial intelligence research have to do with family heirlooms? And I'll tell you. Last year, someone close to me asked me a set of very compelling questions about the ways the experiences we have as children can affect the impact of experiences that we have as adults. They were hard questions, and I didn't have answers for most of them at first. They stayed with me for months. They seemed important. So, after 5 months of mulling these questions over continually in the back of my mind, I went out for a walk on Halloween weekend, and all of a sudden, it must have been like that dude who dreamed about the structure of benzene after working on it for a while, and then he finally dreamed the structure. This whole setup for an experiment that shows the way attachment styles, which is to say the patterns of interaction that shape our most intimate and important relationships, could be described as optimal interaction strategies that emerge from different environmental pressures, and that I could test this by training up many hundreds of thousands of Q-learning agents under a variety of environmental conditions, and seeing if there were consistent patterns in the ones that performed the best that could be mapped to the traits that are described in the attachment styles that are described empirically by developmental psychologists. So once I had that insight, and I saw a landscape of interactions, like a topology and an experimental setup, everything in me was moved to make that manifest so I could answer the questions of the person that I cared about, and more generally provide a general solution to the ways our experiences shape our response patterns, and the ways our responses recursively affect the sorts of experiences that we have. It seemed like a general solution to that with a mathematical basis could be used to improve the quality of human relationships in many contexts, and provide guidance as to how each of us makes choices, as well as how our institutions make choices that affect the security and the safety and the levels of happiness that we can gain from interacting with one another as human beings. So I set to work building out an existing reinforcement learning framework to create the functionality that I needed on top of what was already there. And I mapped out ways of characterizing the mathematical representations of the Q-learner hyperparameters in terms of human traits, human attitudes or traits, and then ways that changes in the environment and environmental conditions had differential relationships with changes in those hyperparameters, in ways that could elicit different kinds of attitudes toward life and interaction and trying things, or what you do in the face of challenges, what you do in the face of uncertainty, or what you do when things are, stable and it seems like you've got everything figured out. I mapped those to the traits of the, secure, preoccupied, avoidant, and fearful secure, preoccupied, avoidant, and fearful attachment styles that, like, those are like the most basic styles that are defined by developmental psychologists. Although different practitioners have slightly different definitions of these that suit their needs. That was just one component of the puzzle. The other part, the quantitative part that I needed to create to connect this mapping to the frameworks that psychologists use, came from essentially running what's like a very large particle experiment by generating hundreds of thousands of simulated learning agents and growing them up in a variety of different conditions. And I controlled the harshness, which is to say how difficult penalties are, and the responsiveness, which is to say how reliably the environment comes through with nurturance rewards, and the maintenance costs, as well as the variability of each of those separately, and like the underlying chaos level in the environment. And recently I got results that suggest that stable, consistent, yet nonlinear relationships do exist between the combinations of hyperparameters seen in the top performers in each section of these environments. Which is to say that a particular interaction style does emerge as optimal in each of these sectors, each of these characteristic environmental regions. And it depends on more than one thing. In other words, these interaction styles do emerge as optimal. Whether they are the exact interaction styles that map to the styles, the attachment styles mapped by psychologists, is what I'm working on now. If you know me, you'll know that I am not a boastful person. And when I tell you that this work forms the foundation for a general solution for a mathematical theory of how attachment landscapes emerge from interactions, I'm not exaggerating. And when I tell you that, I mean, I literally wept when I saw this first batch of results, and this only represents 3% of the data I've generated so far. It's not enough to test all 3 of the hypotheses that I defined when I started out, just the first one. I would like to take this research to like an institution that has other people who are doing similar kinds of work, someplace with an interdisciplinary program or a social complexity studies program, so that we can take this to the next level and start getting it into the hands of people who can use it, whether they're researchers or policymakers or just, practitioners who like to have strong theoretical groundings in what they're doing. The way you can support this is by helping cover my compute costs, which are non-trivial, and helping me keep the lights on for a couple more months while I tutor part-time and focus on this. In the last few years, I've had a couple of very difficult work experiences, including ones that have involved just the trampling of my civil rights. And again, I'm not saying that to be dramatic or anything like that. But my passion for my work is powerful. And the caution that I have around corporate AI research endeavors that place a lower priority on the integrity of their research than they do on evaluating the human beings that work there in terms of their profit margin rather than in terms of the quality of life that can be created for each of them and by each of them. I hope you understand why doing this research in a sustainable, independent way is so important. This is a synthesis of artificial intelligence and a learning theory of attachment that nobody else is doing. This work is literally at the intersection of so many kinds of current research endeavor. It is very much like the psychohistory that Asimov talked about, only it's designed with the very simple goal of making it possible for us to make better choices and have better relationships. If you would like to be a part of that, now's your chance to get on board. Thank you so much for listening.